begin with the prayer before the crucifix. Not the prayer before the crucifix. What do we have in? We adore thee. We adore thee, most holy Lord Jesus Christ.
Here in all your churches throughout the world, and we bless you because by your holy cross you have redeemed the world.
So I would like to share some reflections according to the mandate we received from himself, that it be somewhat personal, somewhat inspirational, but rooted in the sources. Is that accurate? And I hope I'm able to keep to what I was asked to reflect upon. And I want to do so by saying that my association with this text of Bonaventure has been a complicated one, long and a complicated one. And I think you'll understand where I'm going almost from the very beginning. It was a Jesuit at Fordham who was the one who challenged me to do something with our tradition. He said, "You have one of the richest traditions in the church and you do very little with it," which I thought at that point, that was early 70s, was probably very, very accurate. Especially here in the United States, we only had that big red book, if you remember, and that was just being published. That was a new resource on the horizon. He was the one, and it was the Jesuits, really, three of them in particular, who challenged me to start reading Bonaventure. And I get to Rome to write my doctoral dissertation, and I had to go around to all of the libraries there, Franciscan libraries in Rome, to find out if somebody had done what I was proposing for my dissertation. And I was greeted with a kind of a constant refrain from the OFMs and the conventuals and ourselves. Why did I want to write on Bonaventure's life of St. Francis? It was a betrayal. That was kind of the refrain. From the OFMs and the conventuals, I was told, "You're a Capuchin, you shouldn't be spending this much time." And then there was a very regular visitor that we had at the Collegio, Bishop Moorman, John H.R. Moorman, who was one of the confidants from the Anglican Church of Paul VI. He came to the college quite regularly because he felt very comfortable with us. And he came to me one night. He said to me, as I was washing the tables there, he said to me, "They tell me that you're writing on Bonaventure. Why are you wasting your time writing on Bonaventure?" He said, "You know, the book is a betrayal of our tradition, your tradition, especially as Capuchins." I said, "Yes, I know, Bishop Moorman." And he, being English, just touched the Irish core inside of me and then he exploded. And I said to him, "You will be mentioned on the first page of my doctoral dissertation," which he was. And anyway, so I finished the doctoral dissertation. I get the invitation to go up to the Franciscan Institute, which was just beginning to come into its own there in 1976, 1977, I guess, 1977 was when I started up there. And two people started to really challenge me in somewhat similar vein. Maurice Sheehan, Capuchin from the province, and Conrad Harkins. Both of them were historians. And they really disagreed with my interpretation of Bonaventure's major life. It was kind of fascinating. But then they kept saying, "You're not a historian, so you really this is virgin territory for you, you know?" Well, Joe Duino, if you remember, Joe Duino was there at the time, and Joe Duino and I were just kind of brushed to the side as theologians. You know, we really didn't understand. And they were perfectly happy with me teaching the writings and so on and so forth, because they both knew, Conrad and Horace, that they could correct me, because they were the historians. They were the ones that had the inside vision of what Francis was all about. So from the get-go, I really had this love-hate relationship with the very text that I had spent my time writing on. Well, it continued. It still continues, as Bill Hugo constantly kept writing his critique of the Legenda Maya, and then Michael Casado the same way. And it's funny because it was that stubbornness that I articulated that probably made me spend so much time on footnotes to making sure that I was backing up with all of my passion about this text, that I would back it up. One of the things that I stumbled across very early on in that text was the very text that Robin asked us to start reflecting upon. So there are 6 signs of the cross which lead to the 7th. And he ends the 13th chapter with that listing of the 7, right? But the 6, which are spread throughout chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's very important. This is, you look at chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4, you begin to realize that they're the historical chapters. They're the really mainly historical chapters. 13 shifts the historical from the virtuous, I should say, chapters 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. And 13 becomes the chapter that changes from the historical into the eschatological, the realized eschatology. Now you can see it over and over and over again. It's really quite an ingenious approach to all of this. And he gives the reason for that in the Legenda Minor. So this is the Legenda Major, the Legenda Minor. What is virtue, if nothing else but an energy that allows us to identify ourselves with the life of Christ? That's the way he gets into it. So here we are at the chapter 13, it's a chapter dedicated to the stigmata. So you have 6 signs of the cross leading to the 7th. This is where the influence of John's Gospel hits Bonaventure. There's a commentary on John's Gospel, and you can see it in so many different ways. His theology is a theology of John's Gospel. In John's Gospel, you have 6 signs leading to the 7th, the sign of glory, the book of signs, the book of glory. That's the theology which is present here. Yeah, but there's another way of looking at all of this too. And that's the agenda of chapters 1 and 2 and chapters 3 and 4 of Bonaventure's life. And you can see that in that presentation of the 6 signs leading to the 7th in the agenda. Because as we've been hearing, it began with Balthazar, it went to himself, went to himself, went to himself. Now it comes to me. The first two chapters, or the first 2 signs, first 3 signs, are very much caught up with his conversion, with Francis himself, his conversion, him getting himself totally to the Lord. And adopting as his mantra, I guess, adopting as his vehicle for all of this, Christ crucified. He identifies himself with Christ crucified. Well, then when you go to chapter 3 and chapter 4 of the agenda, you begin to realize that now it's the birth of the order and the growth of the order. That's where the rest of the signs of the crucified come. And that becomes very, very important from the perspective of the three people that he singles out, Bonaventure singles out as the witnesses of what Francis is all about. And you say to yourself, 3, Cyprian was uncomfortable with that. He made it 4. Bonaventure only chooses 3, and that's important for Bonaventure. He's very judicious in the way he chooses this and that and the other. And you look at the 3 of them and you say, isn't that marvelous? So you have in the first place Sylvester, who's described by Bonaventure as a very disciplined practitioner of virtue. The way he describes it. And you see it elsewhere. He borrowed from Thomas of Celano, his life, and then the others pick up on that. That's the way Sylvester is known. The second one is the poet. Pacifico. Pacifico is known as a man who is obedient, is the way he's described in one of the later portraits of him, a real contemplative who's caught up in words. He's the poet. He's obedient. He's contemplative. He's a man of peace. And so finally you come to Monaldo, the last of the ones that he highlights there in the 15th chapter. And there you have somebody who Bonaventure describes as angelic. And you say, yeah, isn't that wonderful? It's really wonderful, you know. However, does it ring a bell? Of course it rings a bell. Apart to the illuminative, the unitive, the 3 stages of spiritual growth that Bonaventure is very, very much enamored of. And so what he's trying to do, I think, there is saying, is projecting, is teaching that, yeah, you have these 3 witnesses to what Francis is all about. And what they're all about really is 3 stages of the spiritual life, all of which come to realize or recognize in Francis that what he was all about was imitation of Christ crucified. That was the center, that was the bedrock of his life. And so he chooses these 3 to capitalize on that. That's marvelous insight. And you can miss it. Most people do miss it. Because, well, you know, it's just wonderful. So it began to raise in me a number of different questions as I was reflecting upon this. How did each one of them see? One saw them through the eyes of a poet. Let's start with Sylvester. One sees it through the eyes of a real ascetic. Somebody who was a priest, somebody who realized that he was, as one of the 2 of you described him, an ambitious, material-minded priest, and who realized that his life of virtue had to be disciplined, had to embrace a tough road, like most of us do, I think, when we're young. Like most of us do when we go through an awakening period where I'm trying to find my way, as you described yourself so wonderfully in that opening comments, you know? And all of a sudden, wow, but that's Sylvester. The second one, though, Pacifico. I kind of think Pacifico is probably where most of us are. I would think so. We're all caught up in words, preachers. We're all caught up in words. We're all caught up, I think, in a pursuit of inner peace or bringing peace to others. The way it's described is being somebody who's very docile, who's very obedient. And that's probably where a lot of us struggle. That's where I find myself struggling. Until you come to the final one. You come to Monaldo, the angelic one. You don't really find that much out about Monaldo. Really, but they all say the same thing, either before the time of Bonaventure or after Bonaventure. They all describe him as somebody who was a very, very holy, angelic sort of an individual. But doesn't that say something? From each one of their personalities, they saw Francis somewhat differently. And it's something that I've often wondered about. How do each one of us see Francis? Have we ever had a serious discussion about our vision of St. Francis? I don't know if you ever asked me about that, and just presume that I have all of the facts. I'm a Franciscan apologist, right? But it was a memory of that Jesuit who challenged me initially. First class that I took at Fordham, Robert McNally said, as he came into the classroom, we all were awed by this old man. He said, I have an assignment that I want you to get back to me next week. I want you to go home. I want you to sit at your desk with a blank piece of paper. And I want you to write your portrait of Jesus. No more than a page. I want you to write it out, and I want you to describe for me who Jesus is for you. I don't want you to go to any introductions to Christology. I don't want you to go to the Bible. I want you to write out who Jesus, your best friend, your Jewish best friend, is for you. Well, it's funny because there were some really high-powered people in that class. Came back next week and somebody said to him, well, Father McNally, do you want these papers? No. And one guy who became the head of the theology program at Marquette University said to him, you don't want those papers? No. That was the toughest assignment I ever had, said the guy. Yeah, it is for most of us, writing your portrait of Jesus. Try it sometime with Francis. Who's Francis for you? Is he a historical figure? If he is, I can't find much to relate in him, just from the historical point of view. I have no point of reference. I've never lived in the 13th century. But who is he? And I'm willing to bet that were we to take that seriously, we would probably find some huge questions about the way each one of us lives our Capuchin life. I'm willing to bet that. That's a very probing question. How do you see Francis? It's how you see him. It's like how you, in a certain sense, how do you see Jesus? How do you live your life with Jesus? It's wonderful. That brings me to another dimension of all of this. If you look at that paper that I gave you there, with the two passages, the first one, of course, is what I just described. Now, in the unfolding of your conversion, across the Brother Sylvester saw marvelously coming out of your mouth. So the conversion, 1 and 2. And then immediately, we go into chapters 4 and 5, 3 and 4, Sylvester, Pacifico, and Monaldo. All right, so that was the outline. But look at the next passage. The next passage comes paragraph before the one that's at the top of that page. Now, through these most certain signs, corroborated not by the sufficient testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, but by a superabundant testimony of the whole multitude, God's testimony about you and through you has been made overwhelmingly credible, removing completely from unbelievers the veil of excuse, while they confirm believers in faith, raise them aloft with confident hope, and set them ablaze with the fire of charity. Faith, hope, and charity. So, I just wonder, do we hide behind, do we hide behind the veil? Do we hide behind our presuppositions of who Francis of Assisi is and what Francis of Assisi is all about? Do we, to pick up on a theme that Francis, you talked about the other day, do we really believe in continuing formation? Do we really work at taking away the veil that clouds the vision of each one of us of who Francis is? That's a good question. Because if we don't, then we're hiding behind the veil of excuse. I know it all. Really? Really? Or we're hiding behind the veil of, well, he lived in the 13th century. There was a very articulate, popular preacher here in our midst, who I've heard any number of different times, so use not that precise language, but close to it. Oh, I don't know anything about this stuff. I don't. Really? That's not my forte. Really? No, my forte is the Bible. Really? What do you think his was all about? Give me a break, please. So the veil of excuse. But I thought that was a wonderful line that Bonaventure has in that text. But were we to really rip away the veil and struggle with day after day after day, struggle with revelation, taking the veil away, I think we'd see Jesus with a different set of eyes. I think we'd see our Franciscan life through the eyes of Francis. Different set of eyes. And we'd come to really what we need to do to convert, to turn towards him, to do what Francis did, embrace Jesus totally. So lest I put my farmer friends to sleep, there was something at class one day up at St. Bonaventure. It was the second summer, I think, that I taught up there. There was this absolutely beautiful Japanese sister there. And there was a friar there, Peter Damien Wilcox. You wouldn't know his name, Peter Damien Wilcox. He was very handsome. He had these blue eyes that, all of the sisters, they all went gaga over Peter Damien. Old blue eyes, And everybody flocked to his class because he was really an excellent teacher. Everybody flocked to his class. And he came into class one day to see me about something we were trying to do later on in the day. And I said to him, "Oh, his blue eyes." And he was, with that, his Japanese sister came up to me. And she said to me, joking, you have to stop looking at me that way in class. She was absolutely beautiful, and I was always distracted when she was in class. And of course, I told Peter Damien needless to have her pull the rug out from underneath me. Anyway, she said something to me that had stuck with me and stuck with me and stuck with me. Giovanni, I mentioned it to you last week or 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. She looked at me and she said, that class was really wonderful. I had never heard this dimension of Francis before. But she said, there's a saying that Confucius had in the Analects, that when gazing at the moon, one doesn't focus on the finger that is pointing to it. And she looked at it. And I thought, oh, no. And it was just, gazing at the moon, one doesn't focus on the finger that is pointing to it. I think we spend so much of our time focusing on Francis. And what we miss is that what Francis is really pointing to is Christ. Not to think about. So we're the 6th cross. Tomorrow we expect wisdom from Elenia. Glory to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever. Amen.